Welcome! It's a great day to be a miner, so you were finally able to acquire a graphics card or 2 or 6 or 10, or maybe you're just looking at exploring the world of mining and you need to know, what exactly do I need to build a mining rig? Well, we're going to break that all down for you coming up, but first, let's spin that intro. Welcome! Here we are with all of the pieces before me that you need to build a mining rig. And since this video can get a little bit lengthy, what we're going to do is we're going to make sure to put timestamps down in the description to allow you to easily, quickly jump around to your desired section. Also, I'll make sure to put links for my top picks from each of the component groups down in the description. Now let's go ahead and go over each of the core components, and then we'll circle back and we'll elaborate on some of the more tricky options for new miners. I'm feeling a little bit crowded here, so let's go ahead and make all this go away. Ready, set? That never gets old. Let's go ahead and put the full parts list up on the screen for you. First and foremost, mining rig frame. We'll need fans. We'll need ourselves a motherboard. We'll need a CPU and a cooler to hook into that motherboard. We're going to need some RAM. We're going to need a power button to turn the system on. We're going to need a power supply or 2 or 3. We're going to need a solid state drive, a hard drive, or a USB thumb drive, depending on our operating system. We're going to need graphics cards, of course. We're going to need GPUs. We're going to need PCIe risers. We're going to need power cables and splitters. We'll need an Ethernet connection or a Wi-Fi adapter with a Wi-Fi connection. And then we will need a keyboard, mouse, and monitor for initial setup. Let's elaborate. Frames. First and foremost, you need a house for your mining components. There's going to be many options here from various price points and applications, and let's go ahead and go through some of our options. So the first, most tried and true, and where most miners actually get their start is, of course, the PC case or the desktop tower. And with this, you can house maybe 1, 2, up to 3 graphics cards, depending on the size of the tower and the motherboard, of course. And then if you want to actually expand without building out a full mining rig, you could use one of these handy little guys. And this is a desktop GPU mount. Pick this up from the Misfit Mining Discord. They do place orders there. And basically what this does is this allows you to take an additional graphics card and you would just slot it in like so. And you would run it back and plug it into your motherboard. And of course, you would have to run it to your power supply. This would allow you to add maybe 1, 2, 3, 4 extra graphics cards and have them conveniently set beside your desktop. And this one specifically has a room that you can put a 120mm fan on there so that you could keep the card cool if it is a hot running card. One of the most economical solutions for a mining rig would be to use a shoe rack. And this is an example of a shoe rack that you just standardly, this one came from Amazon. I'm actually making a how to build video on this, and it is very cheap, very solid frame for a mining rig. Another great economical solution that a lot of miners choose is a standard wire rack build. These are generally made from standard wire rack shelving like this that can be picked up from Amazon, Walmart, Lowe's, Home Depot, etc. And there are quite a few wire rack mining frame videos out there on YouTube if you need to reference it. If you do decide to go the wire rack method, I highly advise using these. These are GPU wire rack hangers. These came from the Misfit Mining Discord and the Great Baldini. So your GPU clips in and then it dangles and the whole graphics card will hang nice and sturdy on your wire rack. Moving on. Next option are our open air mining rig frame. There's many options that fall into this category, but they'll all be slated into 2 general subsets. Either you're going to buy or you're going to build. Common materials used are wood or angled aluminum. Important facet here is to make sure that you have adequate space, airflow, and insulation of key components. Just don't alter your components. There are tons and tons of build guides on YouTube, again, on how to custom make your own frame. I personally am working on a $25 shoe rack build video guide that I'll be releasing soon. My man Seb Heslow has a great full build guide utilizing both aluminum and wood. Check those out. As a note for building, it doesn't have to be pretty, it just has to be functional. This was the first frame I ever built back in 2018, and what makes this frame special is that it is made to sit on top of a desktop PC. I custom made this on my own design. Back then there weren't as many tutorials on YouTube for mining frame builds. So I made this and it sat right on top of the tower, and it allowed me to add an extra 4 graphics cards right here. It housed my extra server power supply, and then I put this little wire rack frame on the top to put some fans blowing air down in to keep it cool. Buying. Most frames come in a 6, 8, or 12 GPU design. Make sure to go out there and compare prices from different sources, and make sure to watch for the shipping times whenever buying a mining rig frame, so that it doesn't actually come out of China and it might take you 30 days to get it that way. So just keep an eye on that, especially when buying from a place like Amazon. Make sure that the frame itself has a good design, that it gives you good space and airflow for what you're trying to build. And expect to pay anywhere between $50 to $200 USD for a nice new mining rig frame. A few of my personal favorites have been the AAA Wave Sluice version 2 12 GPU mining rig frame. Make sure to check out my video on it up above. I also am a big fan of the AAA Wave Dredge 2 mining rig frame. It has a very nice, unique design to where you can house up to 18 fans on it, and it's great for any of those hotter running graphics cards while you're mining. And next, I also dig a simple 6 to 8 GPU cheapo frame like the one that I have running behind me, and this guy right here, of course. This is just a standard 8 GPU mining rig frame. I believe it ran about $50. It houses 5 fans on the back, and it gives plenty of space for your motherboard and a couple of server power supplies, as well as your 8 GPUs across the top. Another option that many people really like are the Veta frames. Me personally, I'm not a fan. You have to do a little bit of modification sometimes if you're trying to do certain setups with them. But they are a solid frame and a solid option, and they look sleek because of the little yellow connectors for your fans and whatnot. And last, one of my other favorites is the Kingwin mining rig frame. It's a very solid construction. It costs a little more in most cases, but man, it is such a solid, nice design. Motherboards. I could literally dedicate an entire video to this subject, but we're going to try to be as brief as possible. Basically, you want to have a motherboard that will support as many or more graphics cards than you intend to run or to upgrade to at some point. Some of my favorites are generally the Intel Z boards, the Z270, Z370, Z390. These boards are very versatile, and they offer a lot of compatibility, as well as they give you a lot of onboard PCIe slots natively. Another motherboard that has been tried and true for me is the Gigabyte H110 D3A mining motherboard. I've been running these for a few years, and they used to be really great economical solutions for anywhere from 6 clear up to 9 with an adapter GPUs. However, note that anything with the word mining on it nowadays is going to cost significantly more just because of the term mining. So the Z boards are a great economical solution to do starter builds and even more elaborate builds on going forward. Important note here as well, just because the board has 6 PCIe slots physically on it does not necessarily mean that it can run all 6 of those simultaneously. You got to consult with the manual on the specific motherboard to see how many PCIe lanes it will allow. Next, the brain of the system, the CPU. First and most importantly, the CPU must be compatible with your motherboard. To ensure that it is compatible, simply Google the motherboard, go to the official site, click on the support tab, then click the CPU compatibility chart. It will list an entire long list of different compatible, known compatible CPUs for that specific motherboard. Next, integrated graphics are a must for your Intel chips. If they have the letter F as in Fox, then they do not have integrated graphics. If it is a Ryzen chip, if it does not end with the letter G, then it does not have integrated graphics. A common misconception from new miners is that the CPU must be a high-end nice CPU. A CPU does not have to be high-end to run a mining rig. Cheap Intel Celerons work great in mining rigs. This is a G5420, this is a G3930. These do have integrated graphics. These are great budget options. Next important tip, make sure there are plenty of PCIe lanes. To find this, simply Google the specific CPU and Google PCIe lanes. For example, I would search Intel Celeron G5400 PCIe lanes and then go to the official site or go to the Intel Arc site and find out how many PCIe lanes this supports. As for the cooler on these things, it does not have to be fancy since the CPU will not really be doing much work here. Stock Intel or Ryzen coolers work fine for this application. Next up is your RAM. You really only need 8 gigabytes of RAM here. Some people will tell you that 4 gigabytes is enough, but I highly advise with the growing demand to go with 8 gigabytes. Another note is that speed is not necessarily important on your RAM in a mining motherboard. The biggest and most important thing is to make sure that your RAM matches the motherboard and your components. I generally advise that you buy the motherboard, then the CPU, then the RAM. But you could also go CPU, motherboard, RAM in that order, and then that way you know that they're all gonna match and you don't have to buy the expensive RGB Corsair Vengeance Pro. This is really nice RAM, but totally unnecessary for a mining motherboard. Go with cheap, go with efficient, and then you'll be happy along the way. Next, you'll need to be able to turn on the mining rig, and that's where the power button comes in. Most people, including myself on most rigs, use a simple $2 toggle push button switch, and this plugs into your motherboard and basically causes a jumper between the two pins to turn on the power. Easy peasy. Or you could go with a fancier, more expensive button like this one here. I've been running one of these for about 3 years, and the only difference on this is it does have the power indicators. It has a reset button, a power button, and a hard drive light indicator. Completely unnecessary, but totally a beautiful, nice, oversized button. Power supplies. A power supply can either be a standard ATX power supply like you find in a PC tower, or it can be a server power supply like this one right here. So first, let's start with the power supply ratings. PSU ratings are very important in a mining rig, and by rating, what I mean is the 80 plus rating. Is it an 80 plus? Is it 80 plus white, bronze, gold, platinum, titanium? Basically, what those ratings indicate are the efficiency. The more efficient a power supply is, the less power that is lost in heat transfer. For me, personally, I'm okay with running my main system on as low as a bronze power supply, i.e. running the motherboard, the CPU, and the associated components. But when it comes to the graphics cards themselves, I would rather run those on at least a gold rated power supply. This one is a gold rated HP 1200 watt server power supply. And this one is an HP 750, but this one's actually a platinum rating. And the reason you want to target higher efficiency power supplies is one, obviously the power loss in the transfer between the power supply and the components, but two is that you're providing a more consistent power flow to the components, which actually leads to better longevity down the road. An ATX power supply is a standard power supply that you would find in most PC cases. For an ATX, make sure that you have enough PCIe connections for what you're intending to run. Never ever overload your connections. Try not to use SATA on a riser or a GPU. A SATA plug is rated for 54 watts, and a riser can easily pull up to 75 watts. Obviously, at some point, that connection is going to fail. It's going to melt, and that's a general fire hazard. Other option, and my preferred option, is to use a server power supply. The reason I prefer the server power supply over the ATX for mining is one, they are more versatile and they provide you with many more PCIe outputs. And number 2, they have a much better price to performance. And number 3, they obviously are very efficient and they are made to run 24/7 in a server. For my power supply needs, I generally buy everything that I need from Parallel Miner. I'll make sure to put a link down in the description. And for an in-depth explanation on server power supplies and how to actually connect these things, make sure to check out my video up above. A new user or a new miner really kind of struggle with adapting to server power supplies because they are way out of their comfort zone. But do not overthink them. They are not actually that scary. They are great power supplies and they are a much better option in my opinion. One additional note here, if you plan on running only server power supplies, you will require either a PICO adapter, and what a PICO adapter is it basically plugs the 6-pin power into the little PICO adapter, which then plugs into your 24-pin in the motherboard, as well as the CPU 4-pin or 8-pin power, and maybe it gives you a SATA or a Molex connection. Or your second option, and a great option, is Parallel Miner offers a ZSX all-in-one breakout board, and it's a little bit bigger than your standard breakout board. And what it does is it offers a 24-pin out, a CPU pin out, and also a SATA and a Molex, and that allows you to power your system as well as your 6-pin components. Power cables and splitters. If you're running standard ATX power supplies, maybe the only thing that you need is actually a splitter. Maybe you need to split a single 8-pin into dual 8 pins for your graphics cards, or you need to split a single 6-pin into dual 6-pin to run 2 risers at a time. However, if you're running a server power supply, you will need to have some of these power cables. And what these are single 6-pin. And they plug into your breakout board here, a single 6-pin, and then it runs over into an 8-pin. This single 8-pin can be split into dual 6-pin or dual 8-pin depending on your graphics card, and you can run 2 risers off of one of these, or you could run a single graphics card with multiple pin inputs. Again, make sure not to overload your cables or your adapter ratings. Solid state drive, hard disk drive, or USB drive. You need to have an OS or an operating system on your mining rig, and the 2 main operating systems are Hive OS, of course, which is a Linux-based system, or Windows OS. If you are running Windows, you'll need a solid state drive or a hard drive with at least 120 gigabytes of storage. The OS itself takes up quite a bit of space, but what you're going to run into is that you need a lot of virtual memory assigned onto the drive for your GPUs to effectively mine on specific mining applications. If you are running Hive OS, you can easily cut down your storage in half. You could even run Hive OS from a USB drive if so desired. Next up is the PCIe Risers. This is a place where we're going to get varying opinions depending on who you ask. Some people will tell you that you need to use the fancy 8 capacitor risers from GPUrisers.com. And while these are super nice and they're sleek and pretty dependable, personally, I'm in a camp of using the non-branded risers. I recently made a video on how to acquire these cheap but efficient and sleek risers up above. My biggest advice when it comes to risers is that you want to make sure that you're using 6-pin power, or at the very least use Molex power to power your risers. Do not use SATA powered risers. Also, don't use these terrible adapters that a lot of these companies include with their risers. This is a 6-pin plug over here, and this is a SATA connection. Again, this is 75 watts rated. This is rated for only 54 watts. If you're funneling 75 watts through a 54 watt connection, you will have failure. Personally, I've been running the version 006S risers for quite a many years, and they have been quite reliable. But just as of recently, I've switched to the 009S Plus or the 010X. Both of these are amazing risers, and I have had very little failure ratings up to this point. As a side note, I do have a number of newer versions of risers coming in to test and to show off, so expect some future content coming up on those. Next, the graphics cards, or the GPUs, the most important component of a mining rig, the brain of mining, the worker, the key cog to earning all that sweet, sweet crypto. This, of course, is also the hardest piece to acquire. My biggest advice here is do not overpay. Do not pay scalper prices, especially in this current climate where crypto is down, earnings are down. You will regret it later if you paid the scalper prices. To get a feel of the current market value, you can go out to eBay, you search the specific GPU, you search country, the sold items, and then you sort by ended recently, and you can see what each graphics card is actually selling at, or the current market value. My second tip is to avoid buying the old Polaris or the 10 series graphics cards. Polaris are your RX 470, 480, 570, 580. And when I say 10 series, I mean the NVIDIA 1060, 1070, 1080, 1080 Ti, etc., etc. My reasoning here is simply that they are still decent performers in mining, and especially in things like Flux. However, if the market continues this downward trend, then the market is going to flood with these GPUs, these old gen cards, and essentially their value drops to the floor. Next tip is to make sure that your graphics cards contain at least 6 GB of VRAM, preferably 8 GB. While the 4 GB models still can mine, due to the larger DAG files in some of these algorithms, these cards are very limited on their flexibility. If you want to know how much a card can currently earn, I advise to visit whattomine.com, and then you can simply select the GPU tab, select the specific graphics card, and then go ahead and select all the algorithms and calculate. And then go down and look at the current real-time earnings of how much that graphics card can mine on that specific algorithm. You can even plug in your per kilowatt hour electricity rate and see how much electricity that specific graphics card will cost you per day on a specific algorithm. Last but not least, buying GPUs can be very, very frustrating. Join Discord, set up alerts, know what price that you are willing to pay, and then keep an eagle eye out for the drops. Jump on those drops as quickly as they happen, scoop up what you can, and then if you decide it's a bad value proposition, cancel the order. Most of those drops you can buy first, cancel, question afterwards, and then let the dust settle. Fans, one of the most important parts for both performance and longevity on a mining rig is to keep the components cool, and that is where our fans come in. For the most part, you want a higher RPM and a higher CFM on your fans. The CFM is the amount of air that the fan actually moves for the ratio of the size of the fan. Note that often the higher CFM leads to a higher decibel level, which is ultimately a higher noise level. My choice here are the Arctic Delta P12 fans. These are 1800 RPM. They offer a higher CFM than most standard 120mm fans, and they come in a very great economical value on a 5-pack. And now, the biggest issue with these is, of course, they have no RGB lighting, and we all know that RGB adds hash rate. So if you're going for the cheaper option with beautiful RGB, albeit at a lower CFM, I advise to go with the Up Here RGB 5-pack. These come with a integrated fan hub, and thus you don't have to use splitters to loop them into the motherboard. And if you want a very sexy RGB alternative, my man Chump Change turned me on to this fan. I'll make sure to link these down in the description for you as well. These are absolutely gorgeous, and he features them on his test bench, and they're in many of his videos. Go check out his channel. If If you want to go with the best airflow, albeit at crazy noise level, I advise to go with these. These are 3000 RPM, 120 millimeter Chinese unbranded fans. These things create an absolute wind vortex, and they boast about 155 CFM. As a side note, make sure to be very careful not to get your fingers in one of these when they're running. Speaking for a friend. These specific fans run on a Molex connection, and they can be daisy chained one into the other. Basically, the connection has a Molex connection, a male and a female end, and then that way they can plug in a row, and they easily will affix to the back of a mining rig. Your Ethernet connection, your Wi-Fi adapter. You need to be able to connect to an external network in order to mine. That being said, you do not necessarily need a ton of speed. This is a very common misconception for new miners. For instance, I have nearly 2.5 gigahash on ETH across 7 mining rigs, but I only have 100 megabyte per second connection coming into the door. The more important aspect for your network connection is, of course, the latency. And the latency is the clarity and the strength of your signal. So whenever it is possible, you want to use direct Ethernet connection, but when it isn't available, a strong Wi-Fi connection will work just as good as long as it is a low latency connection. Additional items, you will need a keyboard, a mouse, a monitor, and these pieces are necessary for your setup initially, but not necessarily needed for continued mining. You don't necessarily need to have a display hooked to a mining rig. You don't really need a mouse or a keyboard, as long as you can remote to it and adjust your settings in either Hive or through Windows. Next, Wi-Fi outlets with power monitoring are great items to have. You would connect your rig to it, and then that way you can actually remotely see how much wattage is pulling at the wall, and then as well as you can remotely restart your rig. These things are the Tekken 15 amp edition, and these are actually rated 120 volt clear up through 240, so these are getting a little harder to find. Make sure you watch your power rating if you are using 240 volt whenever buying Wi-Fi outlets. And last but not least, I highly advise to have a cheap power meter like this one that you can plug into the wall. These only ran about $15 on Amazon, and basically you can directly monitor and know exactly how much power your rig or computer is pulling at the wall. This is actually a fancier version that was designed and brought to me from Mad Electron Engineering. Make sure to check out his channel, by the way, has great informational content. And what this does is it uses a drok meter. You plug from the wall in here and you plug out to your mining rig here, and it gives you a complete running statistics. Amazing item to have. 3 final tips. Always remember that RGB adds hash rate. Number 2, never invest what you cannot afford to lose. Be smart about your purchases. Do not just throw down a large amount of money or credit on the top hardware. Shop around, get an idea of the current market value. And finally, number 3, the best part of mining is the mining community. Most of the community is very welcoming, very open, very helpful. Join the Misfit Mining Discord, ask questions. There's always seasoned vets in there willing to help out a new miner. And coming up in part 2, we will be doing a Noobs build guide, building a full mining rig from the ground up. Thank you for sticking along with me on this very long but in-depth video. Let's go ahead and jump to that outro. Well, there you have it. Now you have the tools, the knowledge, and the parts you need to get building. Coming up in part 2, we're going to do a Noobs full building guide. If you have questions or suggestions, make sure to post them down in the comments, and make sure to join the Misfit Mining Discord. There's always plenty of seasoned vets in there willing to help you out. If you like the video, you know what to do. Smash that like button and subscribe for future content. Thanks for coming along, and enjoy the ride. Pew.